Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Build a Better World Using Social Good Innovation Teacher Camp. Today, we'll be talking about the prototype phase. So, we are so excited to do that and happy that you can join us. And we look forward to sharing these activities with you. Hopefully, everything is going well. Hopefully, you're staying safe and everything is great. So, with that, we'll go on to the next slide.
So just a recap from last week. Obviously, at the moment, we don't have anyone live with us, but I do know folks are tuning into the recordings. So for those of you out there, we'd love to just sort of, and maybe you can share this with us via the community or send us an email, or we'd love to sort of understand how things went last week with ideation and how the your activity went and what your thoughts are, just in general. As a reminder, there's no tardies here. This is even if you aren't able to get your do the activities beforehand. We'd love to still have you join us and continue this work. We're really hopeful that longer term, those of you who are participating will, at least now get a flavor for what we're doing, and then think about ways that we might be able to collaborate with you in the future. Either we can support your efforts doing these sorts of design thinking, challenges, or bringing this type of educational opportunity into your classrooms or your schools. So please just keep that in mind. We'd love to chat with you about that anytime. And we are planning on, again, this coming year, we haven't worked out all the details of the timelines, but we are working on, we will be running our annual Teen Innovation Challenge again. So hopefully you'll be able to join in with that. One comment about that for those of you watching, we've had many educators who kind of get started with their students in the fall. And so they take a little bit of a longer view. While we tend to offer the challenge, our timeline for the challenge with students tends to focus on the springtime, but we know many folks who start their efforts in the fall and then continue on into the spring. So keep that in mind, and we're happy to help. So today we are going to talk, as Alina said, about the prototype phase. This is represented in the Packful app. You can see it here, but again, the arrows always indicate that we do not believe that any of this happens in a perfectly linear fashion. We just talk about the efforts in a linear way that maybe helps you think about it. But as your students and you are going through this experience, remember that a lot of the work feeds off of each other in phases. They might work on something and you might send them back or continue on. But today we're going to talk about prototype. I'm going to go ahead and play, this is the prototype video that we've created that's a part of the app that actually is shown to students on the top. And I'm going to go ahead and show this and we'll talk a little bit more.
You have an idea. Now bring it to life with prototyping. The prototype phase is all about designing and building your solution, then testing it with others to see how it works. Your team will start by designing a 2D or 3D model to go from an idea in your head to something visible. Models will help you visualize what your solution will look like and how it'll work. They can be made with physical materials like recycled plastic and paper, or they can be made digitally with graphic design apps. Then you'll use your model as a guide to build your prototype. A prototype is a simple and inexpensive version of your solution that works. It doesn't have to work fully or perfectly, but it should be able to be used by other people so they can test it and provide feedback. Once your prototype is ready, take it to the people who need it and ask them to try it out and tell you what they think. Based on their feedback, you may enter a cycle of redesigning, building, and retesting until your solution evolves into something impactful that meets people's needs. Building a better world happens by continually improving your solution over and over again.
So one thing I'll add to the prototype phase. So I think this is actually one of, I don't have favorites per se, but maybe I do have, if I did, it might be this one, only in the sense that this is the opportunity for teams to really create something. So a lot of the work before is maybe framing and brainstorming and thinking about ideas, and then we're ultimately going to the whole packaging and pitching. But here, this is really like you roll up your sleeves and build things. And it is broken apart into these three areas: design, build, and test, because we see these things. We have brought those together into this phase, and we see them working this way. And I will point out that prototyping does not mean necessarily that you're always building something physical or a product, right? Because throughout the work that we've been talking about here, you can prototype a solution, and that might be a piloting a solution, but you can go through the same types of motions, whether you're building a solution or a product. You just think about them a little bit differently. And these phases, design, build, test, really are that modeling, what is a kind of a low fidelity version, and then creating something or piloting or prototype, and then getting feedback on it. And that's kind of creates that iterative loop that is important in this process of discovering and creating solutions.
You have an idea.
I have already explained my idea. Yeah.
Okay, so today we're going to take a look at these specific activities underneath the categories design it, build it, and test it. So let's start with design it. Now, in these activities, students, as Monty said, will get a chance to design and even model their ideas. So let's talk about activity 1, 2D model. This is where students have the option, they could either use pen and paper or use digital software to complete their 2D model. Now, some teams will create a product, which can be graphed, sketched, diagrammed, and more. And it could also include the features and even label the parts. Now, if your team, let's say a student team chooses a service such as a campaign, fundraiser, petition, website, a public service announcement, apps, we've seen all of those, which could be drafted into an outline or a flow chart, concept map, and more. And so once they are finished, students can upload they can either take a picture of their diagram or save it as a file and link it into Packful. But the key part is it's just an opportunity for them to organize their ideas into some kind of flow chart or diagram that could be used to take their idea to the next level. In activity 2, 3D model, students have the option to create an actual 3-dimensional model using either craft materials that they may have around their house, or they could go to the store, or they could use some 3D design programs such as Tinkercad, Tilt Brush, and Google Blocks. And I know, so anyways, it's just a great opportunity for students to work together. I like the programs of especially like Tinkercad that allows teachers to create like a class, just like most learning platforms do. And students can work on their design together simultaneously, which is pretty awesome. And as the teacher, you can see the work that they're doing in there. So it's just a cool way. Like I said, they can create it themselves or they can use digital platforms, but both are supported through, with teachers' facilitation. So the next set of activities are build it. And this is where students are creating a working model of their prototype. So in activity 3, prototyping to test, students are expected to build part of their idea, and then they add on to it slowly. So for example, they look for certain elements. So they have to identify visual, empathy, space, and technology needs for their solution. So it really helps them to think it through. And then they'll plan and begin to build their prototype. And then, of course, at the end, they have an opportunity to reflect on what they learned through the process. In activity 4, prototyping for empathy, students will build based on putting themselves into the user's shoes. So they'll build a prototype that focuses on the user and the user's needs. And so they'll consider questions like, what will make the product most helpful for the user? What features do they think the user would deem most important? And will the user be able to operate the product? So sometimes taking a step out of their shoes into another person's shoes helps them to really understand and really empathize with the people who will actually be using it. In activity 5, prototyping another idea, students will build onto an existing prototype by adding on features and enhancing its quality. And this one is pretty cool because I think we've all used products where we would say it would be good if it could just Like, it's great, but I wish it would. So it's an opportunity for students to get that experience, to take something that already exists and then think about how they can enhance it. And so they'll plan and sketch adjustments and improvements, and then they will have the opportunity to rebuild that product. Afterwards, they will once again get a chance to reflect on the added value, whether or not the improvements work, or any thoughts to reconsider.
I would also just add, I think it's worth considering this prototyping, another idea could also really apply to your own idea too. Continuing to, I mean, you can clearly see how these activities kind of build on themselves and it's very iterative. I mean, we say in software development, it's sort of like, it's kind of like mowing a lawn. It's never really done. And so you have to decide when is enough, but you can clearly see how these build on each other and can be revisited on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely. And we'd encourage them to do that. Let's say they do take an original idea, they can still do that for themselves. They can continuously add on, or we call it iterate. They can continuously add on features as long as it works out well and gets good feedback. They're on the right track. So the final 3 prototype activities are test it. And so this is where students can utilize their friends, family members, maybe even potential customers, for the future, to actually get feedback on their ideas. And so an activity I wish, what if, students will be able to frame the tester's feedback in a constructive manner under the umbrella of the questions, or not questions, but phrases, I like, I wish, and what if. This enables an open discussion that leads to thoughtful iteration for the group. They will record their feedback in a 3-column chart with the goal of reaching an optimal solution that addresses most of the user's needs. In activity 7, feedback capture grid, here students are allowed, this is where they allow testers to really spend time just interacting with their prototype, whether they're reviewing it or trying to operate it. But the key thing here is that the student teams do not, that they really just let them explore. They let the users, they don't really guide them. And so here is their opportunity to really listen to the feedback and record responses in a feedback capture grid with 4 quadrants that are labeled likes, criticisms, questions, and ideas. Afterwards, they'll identify key and top improvements to create their optimal solutions. And then finally, there's activity 8, story, share, and capture. Students can reflect on the feedback received from previous test sessions with users. So here's the chance to really analyze the feedback that they receive, and they'll collaborate with their teammates by sharing a couple of interesting and inspiring stories observed while testing the prototype. So as they listen to each other, they'll capture their ideas. They could do it on virtual sticky notes like Padlet, Jamboard, and or they could actually write it down. But the key thing that they're doing is looking for common threads and insights that can translate into actionable next steps to improve their project. So for students who have service-oriented solutions, sharing their plan or idea with their friends and family and gathering feedback and making adjustments can be done as well. So if they don't have something that can actually be, like an actual product where they're picking it up and testing it, they can still take their plan and share it with others, whether it's family members or experts who can give them feedback so they can help to adjust their ideas.
I'll make another note on the tested piece. I think this is actually a piece that sometimes gets ignored by teams, and especially when they're early. And I get it, when time's crunch, something may have to go. But I think it's worth, particularly those student teams who think about how a product or service might be tested or how they might collect feedback, even if they go through those motions, there's a lot to be learned in terms of what they might be able to change. And that's, from a learning perspective, that can be really key, like getting that feedback and connecting it to what they've done and how, at least coming up in their own heads with the test. It really is kind of an inspiration for what could happen next if you were to revisit. And so I think there's really key parts there in the tested piece.
Absolutely. It could also even change the direction of where your prototype goes. Like you may say, hey, we started off doing one thing, but with all this feedback that we're receiving, it could evolve into something else. And
or even you could learn that it's a failure. And failure is not bad. It's a learning opportunity to say, well, then what next? Maybe the whole thing's a failure sometimes, but maybe it's just part of it. That's really key kind of data and information.
Absolutely.
So for this week's activity, for those of you who are still playing along, I would ask you to do one of the prototype activities. Obviously, you heard all these things. I would probably suggest you try to do something in the build it. Whether you're modeling or building, obviously you can't quite just test something unless you do that too. This is your opportunity to, roll up your sleeves, maybe learn a little bit of a new tool, take your idea, bring it onto digital paper or regular paper if you're modeling, whatever feels right for you. And again, it doesn't have to be super complex or involved. It can be those first stages. A lot of those design it activities really kind of also reflect what happens when you design things on a whiteboard or a piece of paper. So those things can be great too and inform what happens next. But that's this week's activity. Any questions?
if someone, let's say they're falling behind on their activities and they would still like to, join in and complete them, can they do so?
Absolutely. And in fact, that's a really good point, because if we, if we talk about the various, and again, this is kind of, let me go back to this slide because I think it's really important. We are not, we believe that this whole innovation process is non-linear, and there's an opportunity to jump in at any point. So even if you haven't done any of the prior activities, this is a great opportunity to jump in and try to prototype something, take your idea and maybe put it on paper, and maybe you just skip the first activities and do this one. That's totally fine. It's a great point, great question, good comment, that you can just start here. And in fact, we know that a lot of entrepreneurs do start here. Sometimes they actually start building something even before they might have really ideated a whole bunch of different ideas, or maybe before they've, thought about how it impacts people or frame, and sometimes those things happen after, because sometimes, creative types want to just go create, and that's totally okay. And then from a learning perspective, you might learn some tools and things like that, but you also then can, the educators can jump in and go, well, what if blah, blah, blah? Like how you go back, think about how it might have impacted people, and then maybe makes it more robust. But I would say absolutely jump in and just prototype.
Yeah, awesome.
That's a great point. So with that, if there are any other questions, we would encourage you to just chime in. I'm going to send out an email here soon with this information. Feel free to reply in the community or reply to one of our emails. If you got any questions or comments, or you need additional support, we're here to help you and try to make this as successful as possible. So with that, we hope you're all having a good summer. And hopefully we'll see some of you again next week at our final week of summer camp.
Awesome.